Emily Harper had always thought her life was steady, predictable, and safe. She had a house in a quiet Oregon town, a husband named Daniel, and a routine that made her feel secure. Every morning she woke to the sound of rain on the windows, brewed coffee, and prepared breakfast before Daniel left for work. But lately, the calm she had trusted began to crumble in small, almost invisible ways. Daniel had grown distant. He came home later and later, barely talking, and the warm smiles they once shared were replaced by silence and distracted glances at his phone. Emily tried to tell herself it was stress, work pressure, or some invisible burden she couldn't see, but a nagging feeling in her chest refused to quiet down. Then one evening, as she sat alone with a cup of lukewarm tea, she received a message from an unknown number. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, and her eyes widened at the photograph that appeared. A picture of Daniel laughing at a restaurant with a woman she didn't know, and a note beneath it. "You deserve to know the truth." Emily's heart froze, her hands dropped the phone, and she stared at it as if it could speak to her directly. Questions raced through her mind, too many to answer at once. Who sent it? How long had this been happening? And why hadn't she seen the signs? She felt a mixture of fear, betrayal, and disbelief, the kind of raw emotion that made her stomach twist and her chest ache. The quiet home that used to feel comforting now felt like a cage filled with shadows of lies. That night, she barely slept, replaying memories of smiles, whispered conversations, and small touches that now seemed distant and possibly false. She wondered how she had missed it, how Daniel's affection could hide such a secret for so long. The next morning she forced herself to move through her routine, making breakfast, pretending to be normal. But inside she felt as though she were walking on a tightrope above an abyss, every step heavy with tension. At work, she couldn't focus. Every glance at her computer or coworker felt distant, as if she were observing life through a fog. Her friend and colleague Ryan Collins noticed immediately. Ryan was calm, patient, and gentle, someone who had always been kind but never intrusive. When he asked if she was okay, she barely nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But she couldn't lie to him. Something about the way he looked at her made her want to confide, to unburden herself of the weight she carried. And by midday she found herself quietly explaining that her home life was complicated, that she had learned truths she wasn't ready to fully name. Ryan listened, never interrupting, letting her words tumble out like water from a broken dam. And for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a tiny flicker of relief. She realized she wasn't completely alone, that someone could see her pain without judgment or impatience, and that thought made the world feel slightly less cold. As the day progressed, small messages, small acts of kindness from Ryan, a refill of her coffee cup, a knowing smile became anchors in her stormy day. When she returned home that evening, the house was quiet, empty, and unwelcoming. Daniel had come home late again, his eyes avoiding hers, a forced smile pasted over a face that seemed older, wearier. Emily's mind raced, thinking of the photograph, the message, and the silent knowledge that her marriage was not what it appeared to be. She wanted to ask him, to confront him, but words failed, stuck behind a wall of shock and sadness. She wandered the rooms, touching familiar furniture, smelling the faint scent of their shared life, and felt the bitter ache of betrayal sharpen with every passing moment. Later, she tried to distract herself by making dinner, but even chopping vegetables felt mechanical, hollow. She thought about the other woman in the photo, wondered who she was, how long she had been a part of Daniel's life, and why Daniel hadn't told her, why he had let her believe in a peace that was never real. By the time night fully settled, Emily was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands, the phone beside her, and a storm of questions she couldn't answer swirling in her mind. And yet, as she stared into the dark room, she felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear for the uncertain future and relief that she finally knew the truth, that the shadows had been lifted, even if the light that came with them was harsh. That night she didn't sleep, but she began to plan, not fully knowing what steps to take, only knowing that her life had changed forever. A quiet voice inside her whispered that things would never be the same again, that she couldn't go back to pretending, that the life she thought she knew had shattered into pieces, and now somehow she would have to put them together again. And just as she began to feel overwhelmed by the weight of betrayal and the emptiness of her home, a small notification popped up on her phone, another message from the unknown number. It simply said, "There's more you need to know." Emily's heart raced. Her mind spun. Her stomach turned. She realized that the first truth she had seen was only the beginning, that her life was about to unravel further, and she was powerless to stop the cascade of secrets that were falling around her. She sat there staring at the message, tears blurring her vision, knowing that tomorrow would bring confrontations, confessions, and choices she hadn't been prepared to make, and for the first time in years, Emily Harper felt that her carefully constructed world was gone, replaced by uncertainty, heartbreak, and the start of something she couldn't yet name, a journey that would change her forever. The morning after the messages and the photograph, Emily Harper walked into work feeling like a ghost of herself, her chest tight, her mind racing with images of Daniel and the unknown woman, the betrayal, and the suffocating realization that her life as she knew it was crumbling. Every step toward her office felt heavy, and every familiar sight seemed distorted, colors dulled by her exhaustion and pain. Ryan Collins, her quiet, observant coworker, noticed her immediately. He had always been kind, a steady presence in the office, but he had never been someone who pushed into personal matters. That morning, however, he walked up to her desk, his expression gentle, a soft concern in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked simply, without judgment, without expectation. Emily froze, her hands hovering over the keyboard, unsure whether to lie, to hide the storm inside her, or to finally let it out. Something about the way Ryan asked so calmly, so patiently, made her falter. She felt the dam break. Words tumbled out before she could stop them. The photo, the message, the feeling of betrayal, the fear and confusion that had settled over her like a heavy blanket. Ryan listened in silence, not interrupting, not offering quick solutions, simply letting her voice pour out into the space between them, filling the quiet office with honesty that she had not allowed herself to speak aloud in weeks. As she spoke, a small relief began to ease the tightness in her chest, a tiny spark of light in the dark storm of her emotions. Ryan's presence was comforting, his steady gaze and gentle nods grounding her as she described the uncertainty she felt, the shock of realizing that the person she had trusted most in the world had hidden so much from her. By lunchtime, Emily realized she had spoken more to Ryan in one morning than she had to Daniel in months. His kindness was not intrusive, it was simply there, offering her space to feel, to breathe, to recognize the hurt she had been denying herself. As they walked together to the small cafe nearby for a brief break, Ryan kept his tone casual but supportive, asking questions only when she seemed willing to answer, and allowing silence to stretch comfortably when words were too heavy. Emily felt a strange sense of safety with him, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in days, she could focus on something other than the betrayal and the fear. She noticed the way the sunlight caught the edges of his hair, the calm way he carried himself, the small kindnesses he offered unconsciously, like holding the door or letting her pick the seat she wanted. The contrast between him and Daniel was painfully clear, but Emily didn't allow herself to dwell too long on that yet. She simply let herself exist in the moment, one small breath at a time, feeling her heart slowly unclench. Back at the office, Ryan kept checking in quietly, a comforting presence that required nothing of her but allowed her to lean emotionally, in the most subtle and human way. She realized she had been starved for empathy, for someone to truly see her pain without turning it into advice or judgment, and Ryan was giving that freely. By mid-afternoon, Emily's mind began to wander, not just about the betrayal, but about Ryan himself, and the way her heart, despite the hurt, responded to genuine care. She caught herself smiling faintly at his jokes, feeling warmth in places she hadn't felt in months. She tried to scold herself for these feelings, reminding herself it was dangerous to let her heart wander, but she couldn't deny the relief it brought to her troubled mind. As the workday ended, Emily felt both exhausted and strangely energized. Exhausted from the emotional outpouring and energized by the realization that there was someone in the world who could see her without making her feel weak. Ryan walked with her to the parking lot, a casual conversation about small things masking the undercurrent of comfort that flowed between them. She noticed how natural it felt to speak, to laugh softly at his comments, to not carry the weight of her fear alone. When she reached her car, Ryan stopped and said quietly, "Emily, you don't have to carry everything alone. If you need someone, I'll be here." The simplicity of the words struck her harder than any lecture or confrontation could have. She realized in that moment that she had been carrying a mountain of pain by herself, and that having even one person willing to simply stand beside her, without judgment, without expectation, was a gift she hadn't known she needed. Driving home, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening and reflecting the soft evening lights, and she felt an odd mixture of dread and hope. Dread for what awaited her at home, the confrontation with Daniel that she knew she couldn't avoid, and hope because she had experienced a brief moment of solace, a hint that there were people who could be trusted, who could be kind, who could remind her that not everyone in her life was hurtful. That night, as she entered her quiet home, she paused in the doorway, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day and the emotional clarity that Ryan had helped her achieve. Daniel was late, as he often had been, and the house was empty except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the walls, thinking about the contrast between the man who had betrayed her and the coworker who had reminded her that empathy and human connection still existed. Her thoughts kept returning to Ryan's eyes, the calm patience in his voice, the way he had allowed her to be vulnerable without exploiting it. She realized that the emotional bond forming between them was gentle, safe, and unhurried, and for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of stability in her chaotic world. But even with this comfort, a storm of questions loomed. What would she do about Daniel? How would she confront the betrayal? And how could she navigate the strange new feelings growing in her heart for Ryan? She knew she had to make decisions soon, yet the Emily Harper knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. The truth had been gnawing at her for weeks, and now it demanded a confrontation. So that evening, with her hands trembling and her heart pounding, she waited for Daniel to come home, rehearsing questions and words that never felt quite strong enough, never sharp enough to pierce the fog of lies that had settled over their marriage. And when he finally stepped through the door, late again, tired and distracted, she looked at him, really looked, and saw the man she had loved slowly fading into someone unrecognizable, someone who had hidden half of his life from her with quiet ease. And her voice shook as she asked him directly about the woman in the photograph, about the messages, and about every lie that had filled the space between them. And Daniel, instead of denying or apologizing properly, simply sighed, avoided her eyes, and admitted the first secret. Yes, he had been seeing someone else, a co-worker he had grown close to over the past year. And the confession hit Emily like a physical blow, knocking the air out of her lungs and making her knees feel weak, her stomach turning, a mixture of shock, heartbreak, and disbelief colliding inside her, leaving her unable to process the betrayal in one simple breath, unable to speak. And for a long moment, they just stared at each other, the silence between them loud with the weight of everything unsaid, everything hidden, everything broken. And Emily realized the life she thought she knew had been a carefully constructed illusion, that the smiles, the dinners, the quiet evenings they had shared were now tainted by deceit, and the trust she had invested in him over the years felt like sand slipping through her fingers, impossible to hold, impossible to recover. And yet, she also felt a strange surge of clarity, a cold light illuminating the truth, as painful as it was, because now she finally saw the man she had married and the choices he had made without her. And she knew she had a choice to make: remain in a house built on lies, or step into the unknown and reclaim herself. And the tension in the room was almost unbearable as Daniel tried to explain, offering excuses and weak reasons, but none of it softened the blow, none of it healed the fracture in her heart. And Emily, feeling the sting of tears she could no longer hold back, left the room, moving to the safety of her bedroom where she could finally let herself break, cry, and process the reality that her marriage was no longer the safe haven she had believed it to be, that it was instead a place filled with betrayal, disappointment, and unspoken truths. And as she sat there, trembling, she thought of Ryan, of his kindness, his patience, his gentle presence during the past days, and a realization struck her sharply. He had become the person she had leaned on, the one who had seen her pain and never judged, the one who had reminded her that connection and care could still exist even when the world around her was crumbling. And she felt a strange mix of guilt and relief, guilt for feeling warmth for someone else while her marriage was falling apart, and relief that she had discovered a heart that could still give and receive kindness without strings attached. And in that moment, Emily understood the second secret of her life. It wasn't just Daniel's betrayal, it was also the quiet realization that she had needs, emotions, and desires that had been neglected for too long, that she could not survive only on what she had given, and that she deserved care, honesty, and emotional safety, even if it meant looking outside the marriage she had once trusted. And as she lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face, she knew that tomorrow would require difficult decisions, that confrontation, communication, and perhaps even distance would be necessary, and she felt the heavy weight of responsibility for her own happiness settle on her shoulders for the first time. A responsibility both frightening and liberating, and her thoughts kept drifting to Ryan, to the quiet strength he had shown, to the small gestures that had kept her from feeling completely alone, and she realized that while she could not yet act on her feelings, she could acknowledge them, honor them, and allow them to guide her in making choices that prioritized her emotional well-being. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, she dreamed not of Daniel, not of betrayal, but of the possibility of connection, trust, and kindness, of being seen and understood in a world that had suddenly become harsh and confusing. And in that dream, she felt hope, fragile and new but real, a promise that she could rebuild step by step, even if the man she had once trusted could not be part of the life she was now determined to reclaim. And she woke with the first light of morning, knowing that the confrontation had not solved everything, that pain would linger and choices would be hard, but that clarity had arrived in the midst of heartbreak, and she was ready, finally, to face both Daniel and herself, to decide how much of her past to leave behind and how much of her future she was willing to shape. And as she prepared for the day, Emily felt the quiet but powerful pull of Ryan's presence in her life, a reminder that, amidst betrayal and loss, human connection, patience, and gentle care could emerge as lifelines, that even when the world felt cold and dishonest, there were people who could stand with her in her pain, and that realization, soft but firm, carried her through the morning, giving her strength she hadn't felt in months. And as she stepped outside into the sunlight that seemed sharper, more vivid than ever, she understood that life would not return to the way it was, that she had been changed forever, and that while Daniel's choices had shattered her illusions, the second secret, the quiet emotional bond she had found in Ryan, offered a path forward, a chance to heal, and an opportunity to reclaim herself, to walk into a future where honesty, care, and respect could exist, where she could be seen and valued, and where she could at last begin to trust again. Future felt uncertain, and every step forward was weighted with both fear and cautious curiosity. Emily lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, replaying the day, remembering Ryan's subtle gestures of support, the lightness she had felt, and the quiet hope that perhaps life could be kind again. And as she stared at the ceiling, she realized that Ryan had become her anchor in a sea of emotional turmoil, and though she was terrified of where her feelings might lead, she couldn't ignore the warmth, the gentleness, and the unexpected comfort he had given her when the world felt like it was falling apart. The day had begun with betrayal and confusion, and it ended with a quiet, unspoken connection that could change everything. And Emily knew that the journey she was on was only beginning, that the first real step toward healing might come from someone she had barely noticed before, someone who had quietly filled a space in her heart she didn't even realize was empty. And she felt, for the first time since the messages arrived, that perhaps she wasn't completely alone, that maybe she could survive this heartbreak and even start to imagine a life where trust, care, and gentle connection could exist again. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Emily Harper, filled with hard choices, quiet heartbreak, and small, unexpected moments of clarity, as she tried to navigate a life that had shifted beneath her feet, knowing that her marriage with Daniel could no longer provide the stability she had once relied on, and every interaction with him now carried the weight of betrayal, disappointment, and the silent question of whether trust could ever be rebuilt, while at the same time, Ryan Collins remained a gentle presence in her world, patient, understanding, never pushing her beyond what she was ready to share, simply walking beside her through the emotional storm and offering comfort without expectation. And Emily found herself drawn to him not because he filled the void Daniel had created, but because he reminded her that human kindness still existed, that connection could be quiet, respectful, and healing, and she began to notice the small ways he had been there all along, offering a smile at the right moment, listening without judgment, sending messages of encouragement when she had faced another difficult day, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she realized that her heart was opening again, not recklessly but carefully, with awareness of the fragility of trust. And yet the pull of this new bond filled her with both hope and fear, because it reminded her that she had needs and feelings that deserved attention, and that her happiness could no longer depend solely on someone who had betrayed her. And as she spent more time with Ryan, whether it was a brief walk through the park after work, a shared coffee in the quiet corner of a cafe, or a conversation that stretched late into the evening over text, Emily found herself thinking less about revenge or anger and more about what she wanted for her future, about who she wanted to be and how she wanted to be treated. and she realized that the first shock of betrayal had given way to self-awareness, a clarity that was painful but necessary, and that the second connection, the quiet, steady support from Ryan, was teaching her that love and trust could still be possible if built on honesty, respect, and emotional safety. And one evening, as she and Ryan walked along a riverside trail beneath the soft glow of streetlights, Emily felt the full weight of her choices pressing down on her, knowing that confronting Daniel one last time, setting boundaries, and deciding whether to stay or leave would define the rest of her life. But in the same moment she felt a surprising calm, a sense of empowerment that came from knowing she was no longer a passive participant in her own story, that she had seen the truth and could act with intention. And she turned to Ryan, her voice low but steady. "I don't know what comes next, but I know I need to make it right for me." And he nodded, eyes gentle, hands lightly brushing hers as if to say he understood completely. No pressure, no expectations, just quiet support. And that simple acknowledgement of her autonomy made her chest feel lighter than it had in months, as if a door had opened inside her heart, allowing hope, possibility, and trust to enter slowly, cautiously, but surely. And she realized that life, despite its betrayals, could offer new beginnings, that the heartbreak she had endured was not the end of her story but a turning point toward self-respect and emotional healing. And she understood that Daniel's choices, painful as they were, had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, her needs, and her boundaries, and that the second secret, the emotional connection with Ryan, was a reminder that the human heart could recover, that gentle care, honesty, and patience could rebuild confidence and trust, and that she deserved that kind of love in her life, not the betrayal that had hollowed out her home. And in the following days, Emily faced Daniel with quiet strength, laying out her feelings calmly, refusing to be manipulated or blamed, insisting on clarity and honesty. And when she finally walked away from that conversation, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a mixture of sorrow and liberation settling over her as she realized that choosing herself was not selfish but necessary, and that the future, though uncertain, held the possibility of peace, joy, and genuine connection. And Ryan continued to walk beside her, never rushing, never imposing, simply allowing her to heal at her own pace. And in that companionship, Emily found courage, laughter, and the quiet thrill of rediscovering who she was outside the shadows of betrayal. And one evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and pink, she turned to him and smiled, a real, unguarded smile that had been absent for months. And in that smile was gratitude, recognition, and the subtle awakening of hope. And she knew that while her marriage with Daniel was over, and the past could never be reclaimed, the lessons it brought, combined with the kindness and understanding she had found in Ryan, would shape her future, teaching her to value herself, to demand honesty, to seek care without apology, and to embrace the beauty of connection that did not come with fear or compromise. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the river, Emily felt a quiet certainty that the path she was walking now, though uneven and uncertain, was hers to choose, that the pain of betrayal had become a catalyst for growth, and that with Ryan's gentle presence, she could explore love again, not recklessly, not naively, but with a heart that had learned, healed, and grown. And in that moment, surrounded by fading light, Emily Harper understood fully that the life she would build next would be defined by courage, self-respect, and the quiet power of human connection, that heartbreak had not defeated her but transformed her, and that sometimes the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is the beginning of a new, brighter story. And as she walked home later that evening, Ryan beside her, their footsteps light on the quiet streets, she felt for the first time in a long while that she was moving toward something real, something safe, something beautiful. And she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she could face them with strength, clarity, and an open heart, ready to embrace the future she was creating, one careful, courageous step at a time.